Welcome to Inspire Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter Swoboda, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Once again, welcome everybody to a new season. It is season 3. This is our first episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. That's me. So we've said goodbye to 2020, Annus Horribilis, and some of us have been somewhat pessimistic about 2021. Some of us have been optimistic about it. And, feel guaranteed that there's going to be a positive change in the wind. Unfortunately, the first 6 days, certainly in the United States, does not seem to herald that at all. Now, I'm not going to make this political, but I do want to cover a few things that are really, really important. So firstly, again, let me welcome all of those listeners who've been, faithful followers for the first 2 seasons. Welcome back. Anyone who wants to get more involved, please avail yourself to sending us some messages on email, which Miranda will put out there. For those of you interested in more, again, follow the prompts. But firstly, I want to reach out and extend a personal message. Some of you might have known over the last 6 weeks, I've actually been recovering from surgery. I had a shoulder replacement. And so one of the things I want to do is reach out to a very special guy who was my orthopedic surgeon and his team, who made what essentially was initially a fairly scary experience, because I've never had any surgery before in my life, so I had absolutely no idea about what to expect. A less than worrying experience. In fact, it was... I kept pinching myself going, is this going to get worse? Are they not telling me something that I should know? But no, I certainly have had a lot less pain. There's still restrictions because I've got to heal, but it's been a really positive experience in the sense that I realised that, even with all my experiences and skills, sometimes we can slip into catastrophizing things when it's not really necessary. Okay, and I want to use that particularly as a basis for later on in the podcast. So in the last season, we've had some guests. I'm hoping that some of those are going to rejoin us. And not only that, but in season 3, we're looking at bringing on board some new guests for some deep and meaningful and inspirational conversations. So the other aspect to today's podcast is that I'd like to think that this is a way of thinking about things that requires some reflection. Okay, in the age of the social media soundbite phenomena, we tend to take things on face value, and I think that that's particularly problematic at this point in time. And it's not confined to particular geographical or political ideas. This is across the board. Now, let me mention another thing which I think is going to be fairly exciting. At least it is very exciting for me. Over the last few years, I started publishing an e-zine called Manifesto. It's a bit of a play on words, but it's essentially about the idea about looking critically at patriarchy and the impact it has on us as individuals, the community, the family, economics, politics, and our perspective on the world. Now, what's exciting is that I'm going to be bringing this back on a quarterly basis, and for those of you who want to become involved, let me extend an invitation that I will accept material from contributors. You don't necessarily need to agree with the particular editorial stance that I take, because I do believe in free speech. However, let me make it very, very clear, I will not accept any form of abuse, conspiracy theory, deceitfulness, lying, or misrepresenting fact. You can have an opinion if you present that respectfully, no problem. But if it gets into the sort of dark side, then I will, take my editorial prerogative very seriously. There is a difference, and I'm going to emphasize this over time, between free speech and abuse. One of the things that I know from past clinical work is that in most domestic violence situations, violence was a consequence of repeated emotional and verbal abuse that went unchecked. And we're seeing the effects of this currently in society. But enough of that for the time being. So for me, I spent a bit of time thinking about today's podcast, given it's a fresh one. I started off with some gratitude. I hope from the last few season 2 episodes, the idea of gratitude has taken some foothold, because I think we do really need to do it. Why? Because we are fundamentally in a stage in history where it's really easy to lose perspective of what's important. Again, coming back to the media, social media, it's rare to see good news stories. It's also rare to see things represented in a constructive and potentially positive light. It colours our perception in a way in which we can easily slip into a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. And those of you who are clinicians know that those two aspects are in fact cornerstones to eventually moving into a form of depression. Okay? The other reason why I mention this about is that I'm looking at generating thoughts and ideas about what really inspirational masculinity is about. Now, I've got a very strong view about what that is. And part of that is that as a man, as an adult male, one of the things that I'm very conscious about is the impact of my thoughts, feelings, and behaviour on others. Now, if you think about this in the broader context at the moment, that doesn't seem to be happening, whether that's here in Australia or in the United States or in the UK or in other areas of the globe. People seem to think that it's okay to just put stuff out there impulsively, and forget about what the consequences may be of doing that. So currently in our historical situation, we really are confronted with two critical experiences. The first one is the pandemic, and the second one is all about political ideology. Now, right now, I don't want to focus on political ideology. As you know, my view is that patriarchy is fundamentally an ideology that needs to be deconstructed, and it needs to be relegated to the pages of history in a way that we it's not a cancel culture aspect, but it's real. It's a bit like, learning about how fascism rises within a community, so that we don't get to the point where 20 million people die as a result of this perverted lie that is spread. Okay, so let me focus on the whole thing about the pandemic. And it's been sort of up and down, up and down. It's, unpredictable. So the question is, if I look at this from a point of view of chaos and crisis, how can I deal with this in an effective way wherein I'm emotionally consistent, where I don't aggravate myself and others within that space? In other words, how do I exercise my flexibility, adaptability to be resilient within this space? Because one of the key things that we know from a lot of research, and certainly out of my clinical experience, a distress, like anxiety, is actually contagious. Okay? And it's a really important point. And it doesn't take a lot. All it takes is a little bit. And it will, like a cancer, grow. Okay? So one of the things I want to challenge all you men in particular, although this is as applicable to women as well, is I want you to think about whether you actually have a strategy on dealing with chaos and crisis. Because right now we know that the coronavirus, COVID-19, is not simply going to disappear. You know, we had all sorts of time estimates from 3 to 6 months initially in 2020 to then 9 months to 12 months. Now people are talking about 2022. So we need to prepare ourselves, certainly in terms of our emotions better, but also given the fact that our emotions are often a consequence of our beliefs, attitudes, self-talk and so on, we need to examine those really, really closely. So, again, the question is, do you have a strategy for chaos and crisis? Now, I suspect most of us don't. The only reason why I've got it in a way is because of the work that I do. I help people who come to me in crisis to regain some sense of control. Now, the question is, how do I do that? Or how do we as psychologists do that? And in reflection, and you know, for me this becomes sort of part of my bread and butter, is that I have a very clear framework in my mind that I'm going to share with my client to help them through, to regain that sense of some control, to be able to really settle emotionally, which means that they're going to need to learn how to rethink things. They're also going to need to learn how to influence their behaviour in a constructive way. Does that make sense? I suspect it does. Now, the question is, how do I do that? So let me give you that framework. Now, at this point in time, that framework is fundamentally a skeleton, okay? And what I'm hoping to do is over the next few podcasts to give everybody the opportunity to really get into this is to flesh it out, okay? So I'm going to talk about, you know, the various steps that I go through in helping people to get on top of their crisis as quickly as possible, because there's nothing worse than simply hanging in the ether in distress and pain. Well, now, I experienced that, you know, pre and post surgery. Now, I wasn't hugely distressed. I had a bit of a sense of humour about it. But, you know, there were times when I went, if I could, I'd pull the plug on this and not do it, which was a bit ridiculous given the fact that post-surgery I kept wondering about whether this is it or not. Now, it's possible that I was lucky in that process, but it was good. Okay, so here's the framework, 4 steps. The first step really is about getting into some mindfulness practice. Okay, it is about really being able to learn to discipline yourself to be in the moment. Because the past's iffy, we have no idea what's going to happen in the future, and if I let my thinking go haywire, the future is going to look pretty terrible. And we know that one of the things that generates an enormous amount of anxiety is what-if thinking. The other part of it is should, musts, and have tos, and we're going to get into that later. So it's really about the capacity through mindfulness to disengage from the world around you by focusing your attention inward. If you can do that, you're going to encounter a place of peace, quiet and serenity once your mind learns to shut down. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step is about learning how